Okay. Hi, Nicole. Thank you so much for joining me. As I said, this is Nicole Reston. She's a licensed mental health counselor and she's the founder of Reston Therapy Group. So I'm super excited to have you today and just talk to you a little bit about your story. So, yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself to
Thanks,
start.
Cassidy. It's nice to be here. A little bit nervous because I haven't done this before, but I felt
Yeah.
comfortable enough to speak with you and tell you and share a little bit more about my story, my background, where I'm at today, where I'd like to go maybe in the future. I'm originally from Hawaii. I was born there and partially raised there as well. Youngest of three,
Okay.
and only girl of two older brothers, and kind of moved around quite a bit within Hawaii and jumped between the island of Maui and Oahu before we moved as a family to California, the Bay Area specifically. And then we moved back to the islands to be close to family, which is where we stayed until um, I became an adult and got married and moved away with my family. But yeah, I was always a little bit rebellious as a teen, and maybe partially because I grew up in a very strict home, very religious, and very sheltered. And so as soon as I became a teenager, I was always kind of curious and would push back and wanted to find things out on my own and on my terms. And someone would tell me I couldn't do something, then it was always, well, why not?
Yeah.
And then
Got to learn for
sometimes
yourself. Yeah.
exactly. And sometimes that would turn into more of a defiance, like I will prove to you that I can.
Yeah.
um, so part of that has, kind of taken me down the wrong paths, but in a lot of ways, it's also kind of led me to the right ones.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about how you feel like growing up in Hawaii has shaped you or why that is important to you to share as far as like specifically coming from Hawaii.
I think because Hawaii is such a very culturally diverse
Mhm.
place, even though it is part of the United States, which a lot of people surprisingly still don't know that. A lot of people who had never been to Hawaii. I remember they would, when we moved to California, they would tell my parents, "Oh, you speak English so well." And so they're
Yeah.
always surprised. Do you live in huts? Do you just spend your days on the beach all day?
Yeah.
And so, I think growing up so, very separated from the mainland parts of the United States, we were kind of we had a mixture of different cultures,
Yeah.
but also very separated from everything else that was kind of going on.
Mhm.
And so I never saw necessarily myself as being kind of different, I guess, but it seemed I kind of did. And I was exposed to so many different kind of languages and foods and cultures, um, that I think I had an appreciation for variety.
Mhm.
And I felt also very comfortable around different groups of people. My mom is Japanese, my dad is Chinese and native Hawaiian.
Mhm.
And so even, having those two cultures kind of come together, um, I, even though I was, native Hawaiian, I never felt like I kind of belonged
Mhm.
because I didn't necessarily look Hawaiian. At the same time, I
Yeah.
never felt like I really belonged or fit in with, the Asian groups either, because I didn't quite, I mean, I did, but not really. I look almost kind of
Yeah.
different. And then we moved around quite a bit. So every single move, I was always kind of the new kid. Um, I always try to kind of fit in where I could, and a lot of times the people that I would kind of gravitate towards would be other kids who were trying to fit in or belong, or they were new, or and I felt comfortable,
Mhm.
because I didn't ever really kind of look, even though I felt this separation. At the same time, I didn't look at other people that way because I
Mhm.
grew up in such a diverse, mixed, culture growing up in the islands, and then having to move to, California as a kid and then moving back. But I think, that's really important to share because of the fact that I am mixed, is that, I can feel comfortable in different groups. But at the same time, I never look at myself as being different.
Yeah, because you
Now,
have those pieces within you, and you can also resonate with maybe their story or where they've come from or their families and those dynamics as well.
exactly.
Mm.
Actually, it was only maybe a few years ago that I heard for the first time someone told me, "You're a woman of color." I'd never heard that before.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very kind of sensitive topic to talk about, what your ethnicity was.
Mm-hmm.
People would kind of tiptoe around it, but in Hawaii, because there was such a mix, and a lot of times people were a mix of a lot of different things, and
So you felt like
so
it was
it
more
was
normalized there to be
it was
different in a way. Like people, there were
exactly
different ethnicities. Everyone was aware of it. Everyone kind of knew about it and spoke about it more freely, it seemed like we just kind of accepted that there's different types of people here.
exactly. And so it wasn't a big deal to ask someone, like what mix, what ethnicity are you? What's your mix? Because so many people there are mixed. And there are like, a lot of it's third, fourth, fifth generation immigrant families who moved there
Mm-hmm.
over time. Um, and so when we moved to the United States, the rest of like California, I remember growing up and it was kind of like tiptoed around, or there was a little bit of maybe just uh, the unknown, and they would say things like, "Oh, you speak English so well." And I don't think that was, intentional. I don't think they meant to be disrespectful or degrading at all. But I think when you grow up in an environment like that, you don't see yourself necessarily different, although you do feel different.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think sometimes our environment shapes who we are, and it also influences the way we see ourselves and even how we show
Totally.
up. And so
Mm-hmm.
because I grew up in such a mix, I could walk into a room feeling comfortable and not feeling like, I don't necessarily fit in. Um, because I always kind of see everybody that you're different, I'm different, but we can still kind of all come together.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that was, not just because of the environment that I grew up in, but also because of what I experienced as a child, kind of going to
Mm-hmm.
different schools and always being the new kid and trying to find a place where I kind of belonged,
Yeah,
because I think
absolutely.
that's what the outside world was telling me. But inside, I didn't necessarily feel that way.
Yeah. So when they kind of would ask you things in that way, that's when you first kind of realized, oh, I think people see me differently here when you moved. Like when they would say, oh, you speak English so well, it's kind of like, oh, now that's sort of mirroring to me that, I am different. And how did that make you feel in that moment as far as, when you moved from Hawaii to the mainland and realizing, and now I think people actually do see me differently here?
Um, I don't think it really kind of hit me quite yet because I was about 7, I think, or 8 when we moved to California.
Hmm.
And, I was still just, kind of oblivious to those things and just having fun. And even though I would kind of like experience it and hear it, it didn't really kind of affect my self-esteem quite yet. I don't think it was until I was a teen and
Hmm.
we moved back to Hawaii where I started to kind of feel it. And it was probably also because of just the age that I was at, trying to fit in with my peers, trying to find myself.
Yeah.
And when we moved back, it was like we had been away from the islands for so long. I showed up at school and I can still remember I had like white denim jeans on and a white with navy blue polka dot collared shirt,
Hmm.
and I had like pigtails on, and all of the kids, and I had shoes on because most of the
Hmm.
kids were wearing like slippers, or like I think flip flops,
Yeah.
that's what they go
Sandals.
to school with,
Hmm.
sandals, yeah. And I had shoes on, and so I stuck out, and
Hmm.
that's when I really kind of felt kind of different from everyone else, and kind of got picked on and bullied a little bit. And that kind of continued throughout, middle school, high school, and I think it wasn't until maybe sophomore year in high school I started to kind of, I guess, find my identity a little bit,
Hmm.
and also started to rebel a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that rebellious phase that you went through and just, yeah, reflecting on it now. Share about kind of how you feel about that stage of your life.
I think that stage needed to happen because obviously, like, I wouldn't be who I am today if that hadn't happened.
Yeah.
It could have definitely gone horribly wrong and led me down the wrong path. But, growing up, we went to church 3 days out of the week.
Wow.
And, I wasn't allowed to watch anything that was rated over like G,
Hmm.
maybe PG, but my parents had to like preview it first. Um, and, our friends were church friends. They were kind of like my family. I went to vacation Bible school, and I went to different various like private Christian schools. And so I think it came to a point where, especially when I moved back to Hawaii, and I was so different, I was trying to figure out a way to kind of fit in. So in order to fit in, I needed to kind of like, listen to the rest of the music the other kids were listening to, or dress the way the other kids were dressing, or, just do the teenage kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But because I guess I had never been exposed to, some of those things, and as my parents would call it, world music, I kind of went really extreme rather than more of a kind of a gradual, like it's no big deal.
Yeah.
And, um, I, and at the same time, I would try to kind of blend in because I was, I was the new girl. And so the new girl would always get the attention, from everyone, including the boys. So a lot of the girls didn't like that. And so I would just really kind of like baggy clothes so that one, no one would notice me, kind of go along with what everybody else wanted to do. And my parents put me in this really small private school, and I had met my who would eventually become my first husband, and he was much older than me. And I was 17 when I had my first son.
Mm.
And as you can imagine, growing up in a very sheltered home, like my parents
Yeah.
were not happy at all.
Mm.
And so, they tried their best, to keep me away. And I would just, I would run away to be with him. And, I wasn't doing drugs or anything like that. I was just kind of running away to be with what I thought at the time, the love of my life.
Yeah.
And I think the more my parents tried to kind of hold me down,
Hmm.
the more I wanted to kind of push back and rebel, which then led me to, becoming a teen mom and getting pregnant at 17. And when they found out about that, then they wanted me to drop out of high school. So I did, and I got my
Hmm.
GED. As soon as I turned 18, I was still at home. I had my son. But as soon as I turned 18, I was like, I'm out of here. See you. And took my
Yeah.
son and moved in, with with the father, who actually we had married. I think it was like a few months after I had turned 18, and also living at home.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was, because of holding the secret that I got married, I secretly eloped and I didn't tell my parents. And so finally, because at the time he was like, when are you going to tell them, we're married, you should be living with me. So I finally broke the news one day. And at the time, my son was, um he wasn't even a year old yet. But I broke the news to them, and I said I got married, and I'm going to be, moving out and living with him. And it just broke their heart, yet again. And so that's what I did. And so I was married for a bit, yeah, before we had a second son.
Hmm. And so it sounds like you went through this big challenging time in this new environment. You became a new mom twice. You're very young. You're in a new environment with someone that you're in love with. And, looking back on that time, was there any advice that you could give yourself now? Like in that space, like what advice would you give yourself as you were going through that?
Honestly, I've thought about this before,
Mhm.
and I don't know if I necessarily would. I mean, sure. I mean, I could probably give my younger self a lot of advice, which ultimately would have led me down a completely different path.
Mhm.
And I don't know what I would be doing. Maybe I would be better off for it. Maybe not. So I
Yeah.
don't know. So it's kind of like, I don't like to kind of live in the past so much, but always kind of looking forward and moving forward. So I don't know. I don't know if I would, but I guess if I did, I think I would have gone back and then maybe told my younger self to not be in such a rush.
Yeah. Don't be in such a rush to grow up maybe.
Not
And
be in such a rush to grow up, not be in such a rush to, I think please everyone.
Hmm. Yeah.
Just kind of sit back and wait, and things will work out.
Hmm.
Because I think that was the other part of like, I don't think I had boundaries back then because I
Hmm.
didn't know that there were bad people out there. I didn't know that people would
Yeah.
take advantage of me. I didn't know that there was there were a lot of dangers out there.
Yeah.
And
I mean, makes sense. Like you were kind of starved of specific experiences that maybe could teach you those lessons like early on. And, they did it out of love, of course. They were trying
mhm,
to keep you safe, but it almost made you not come into those friction points where you had to learn that, oh, I need to like be careful of these types of people, or I shouldn't put myself in those kinds of situations. So it taught you a lot, it sounds like, though, in that piece of your life. Without it, it doesn't seem like you would maybe be where you are today. So it's like we
mhm.
don't want to change any of that ultimately. We just want to maybe make sure that you kept yourself in mind as you were going through all those things and you maybe protected yourself. But I can see how it's like, okay, I don't necessarily want to change that path, because I love where I am today.
Yeah,
So I can see that for sure.
yeah.
And how do you feel like, that has affected you today? How do you feel like that piece of your life, what drive does it give you today, in the things that you're doing, or how does it connect?
Well, I think it connects, and it drives me in many different ways. I think one is the drive to, I think, help other people, obviously, from what I do.
Yeah.
Um, Help them in ways where maybe others are unable to or don't understand them, or
Hmm.
maybe either don't want to or just don't have the time to figure out how to help,
Hmm.
given, everyone has a unique situation. So whether or not that's, like in therapy or just in life, in general, in work, business, I think that kind of that drive came from, my own experiences of um, still trying to figure out what should I be doing, what's next. And I did have, a lot of the things that I've learned are things that I had to either learn the hard way or I have to figure out my own way, or maybe it was just like a really kind comment or a suggestion or some advice that someone would share with me.
Hmm.
um, but I think the other part is, because I became a mom at a young age, I was kind of thrust into responsibility and having to grow up really, really fast.
Yeah.
I kind of had to put aside, you know, going to going to college and getting a degree right away. I didn't take the traditional path.
Hmm.
Um, and because of my children, I had this, obviously, as a parent, you want to be able to provide as much as you can, not because it sounds like a good idea, but because you genuinely want to, because you love your
Hmm.
child, and you want
Yeah.
what's best for them. And so that kind of pushed me to better myself, including leaving my first marriage because it was a very verbally abusive marriage, and he's
Hmm.
also very controlling. He's 15 years older than me.
Oh, wow.
So I went from kind of like one sheltered home growing up as a kid to another sheltered environment, which was my first husband. Um, again, I didn't really go out. I basically, I and I didn't, it didn't work. I had my son at an early age, and I just kind of stayed in, and that was kind of my role. And I think the older I got, my brain development, I saw I saw things as they were, and I realized this is not how it should be. This is not the kind
Hmm.
of father that I want my kids around, because that's not the kind of father that I grew up around.
Yeah.
So I was already thinking of the future and how that would affect them.
Hmm.
And that was one of my main drives to leave that marriage, because I wanted better for my children. But at the same time, I had to figure things out and make a living. And um, at the time, I wanted to be a doctor and I wanted to become a dermatologist. But I couldn't see myself doing that as a young mom. So I decided to go to cosmetology school, and I got a cosmetology license. So I did hair for many years. Um, and kind of going back, and I eventually left my first husband after many years, and got a job and went to school and went back to school later, starting from the very beginning, got my bachelor's and jumped right into my master's program, with no break while going to school and taking care of two kids.
I
And
was going to say, and you're doing this all while being a mom to 2 kids.
mhm.
And at that time, did you have the support of your family? Were they helping you at all?
Yes, very much. So kind of in right actually before I got divorced, my dad had finally accepted that
Mhm.
that I'd married this man who it broke his heart.
Yeah.
And my dad had a heart attack at 51 years old.
Hmm.
And that was maybe about a year after he approached my then husband. And he said, I forgive you for everything that you've done. And then he passed away at a heart attack. And I think after he passed, that's when I was like, I want to have a good father like my father was for me. So I left that marriage, and I had to move back in with my mom
Mhm.
at the time. And my mom had also recently lost my dad because my dad had a heart attack. And so here I am, and I actually had 2 kids at the time. So my oldest was 5, and then my second son at the time, he was I'm sorry, my oldest was 6, and my younger one was about a year old. And so I moved in with my mom, who was also, she had been a widow at this point for a few years. And so, they didn't charge me rent, which was so helpful.
Mhm.
So that way I could go back to school. And then so I
Yeah.
would work on the weekends, work whatever I could. And then at first I started kind of like doing online schooling, kind of hybrid. And then eventually I said, if this is going to move faster, I need to go full time.
Yeah.
So I would work on the weekends, and I rented a chair. And that was kind of like my first exposure to being my own boss because I
Mhm.
needed to have that flexible schedule,
Yeah.
because I had 2 kids and went to school full time, while my mom helped me watch the boys. And yeah.
And you made it through and you got your master's, which is crazy. To do that all while working, taking care of your kids and also, living with your mom and kind of balancing all of that together. And that's really powerful to go through that as a family, the loss and then sort of like reshaping and growing 2 humans all at the same time. That's really powerful. And so from there, I mean, it sounded like you kind of had your eyes set on this goal, and that was at that point to become a counselor. It was that kind of your goal in your mind. Tell me a little bit about like kind of why you picked that
Mm.
um, path
Yeah.
for yourself.
Yeah, thanks for asking that because I was realizing that as I jumped right into school, and I forgot to tell you the story of why I decided
Yeah.
to go back to school. So when I was doing hair, I went to beauty school, and I wanted, like I said, originally I wanted to be a dermatologist. I wanted to focus on
Mhm.
skincare, and but decided, okay, that's not for me at this point. So what's the next thing that I could do? So I thought, well, I could be an esthetician. And so um, they had they had a program that would kind of cover that, and then hair as well, if I ever wanted to do that. But at the time, I didn't see myself being a hairstylist. I wanted to get in and do like facials and be an esthetician. So when
Yeah.
I finished school and I got out, I was looking at all the different kind of spas, and there was a spa there, and they did hair and they also did facials. They kind of did everything.
Mhm.
And but they didn't want to hire me because I was right out of school. So I
Mm.
thought, okay, well, if I just get my foot in the door, maybe someone who's working in the spa will train me. And so the only position they had available was like a stylist assistant, almost like an apprentice.
Mhm.
So I said, okay, I'll do that. So I started doing that, and I did like their apprenticeship program, and it took another 2 years to do that. But that's where I gained the experience of, providing customer service
Yeah.
and having conversations with people as they're in your
Mhm.
chair. And the other hairstylist there convinced me to not go into becoming an esthetician, that the money to be made was in hair. And they just
Yeah.
seemed like so cool. And it was just like, it was so kind of upbeat, and it was fashionable. And I always kind of liked that.
Mhm.
And so I decided to just do that. And I was kind of, that was, I would say, that, like I said, that was the early training for me
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
eventually becoming my own business owner, where I saw the dialogue that went back and forth between the hairstylist and the person who was sitting in the chair. and and I remember the guy that I was assisting, one thing that he's told me, it wasn't so much that you had to be super talented at doing
Hmm.
hair. You just needed to be able to sell your services and carry on a really good
Hmm.
conversation and build a relationship, and they will follow you. And that
Yeah.
was kind of like the first nuggets of wisdom that
Yeah.
I remember, and I kind of held on, because it is very important.
Yeah.
And as a hairstylist, there's very few jobs out there where you have the ability to put your hands on somebody else.
Hmm.
But
Absolutely.
doing hair is one of those jobs that you can. And there's something amazing with human touch, for good and for bad.
Yeah.
And so the minute you would touch someone and start talking with them, there's like this connection and this level of comfort. And suddenly people start opening up and
Hmm.
sharing with the stylist their whole life story.
Oh yeah, they're, the world's unpaid therapists,
Hmm.
I would say.
Hmm.
So I can see where, getting into that industry and having tons of conversations with different kinds of people and you're like, okay, I think I'm good at this. I think this is something that I could do. Yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah. So after I had finished that apprenticeship, um, I started to do hair, and I realized I needed more of a flexible schedule because of my boys, and they were starting to go to school. And so I found out that there was this thing that you could rent a chair somewhere and basically be like a contractor.
Hmm.
So I looked into that, and I said, I'll try that. And so I did. I rented a chair, and I basically would manage my own books, my own appointments, would buy my own products, call up my clients for their appointments and their appointment reminders, and did all of that. And I realized, not only was I pretty good at doing hair, but I was also really good at managing my own little business
Hmm.
of hair. And so I thought, well, this is really fun. Eventually I would like to be the person instead of behind the chair. I want to be in the chair.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
wanted to be the one to be pampered. And I also wanted to I just had bigger plans of what I
Yeah.
wanted to do. Um, and it just wasn't happening in the way, I wanted it to. And I didn't, at the same time, I don't think I was ever necessarily in it for the love of the craft of being,
Hmm.
and some are. There's a lot of people out in every industry, but they just love what they do. Um, I think for me, it was much more broad. I love working with people, and
Hmm.
that can be done in any field. I love, organizing, my day, and figuring things out. And so I wanted to eventually have my own salon, but because it just wasn't happening, and maybe I didn't have like the right mentorship at the time, I thought, well, what's the second thing I want to do, because I can't see myself doing this and standing on my feet when I'm 50, 60 years old. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but for me, I was like, I don't know how much longer physically I could do this. It's a lot of labor. So I decided, I'm going to go back to school. Maybe I'll return to the original idea, which is go to medical school and be a dermatologist.
Hmm.
So I enrolled in school, and did pretty well until I got to what is it, biochem. I think that's what it was.
Hmm. Yeah,
It
that'll
was a
get you.
struggle. Oh my gosh. So, and I was like, okay, well, not that I was going to give up, but I think the other thing, I was also interested in more of the holistic side of medicine. And so there's different types of medical schools out there. But in
Hmm.
Hawaii, they had one particular medical school, which has become an MD, versus I think the other one was a DO, which is what I wanted to be, what I wanted to be, which is more of the holistic side of medicine.
Hmm.
But they didn't have any schools like that available in Hawaii at the time. And so I thought, well, what's the second thing that I might be interested in? And I was always very curious and almost puzzled at times with human behavior, my own behavior, but even other people,
Hmm.
um, and I could even think about, the people in my own life, even my own children, they were dealing with their own thing as well. And
Hmm.
so I had to attend all the parent, meetings, um, and so I just wanted to understand it. And so I think a lot
Yeah.
of people who get into this industry, a lot of times what you find is that there's somebody or something in their own life that kind of activated that curiosity. And so for me, that's what it was. It was just, my children, my first marriage, the other relationships that I had, my family. I wanted to understand that. And so I pivoted and I went to psychology. and thought, like, I think I could do this, because I already felt really comfortable working with clients and having conversation and making connections and helping people. So that's what eventually kind of went into the decision of going into psychology.
So it was kind of like a natural shift. It was like, okay, I have, skills that will serve me with this. And like there's also a genuine curiosity of human behavior in general. And that's one of the rare fields where you actually do get to start to and try to understand, why people make certain decisions and kind of like why they are the way that they are, which I'm sure for you was like, okay, this is genuinely interesting to me. Absolutely. That makes sense. And so obviously you came out of school and you started working with your own clients. Tell me a little bit about your early experiences working with your clients and maybe if you, yeah, just in general, like early practice as a counselor. What was that like for you?
Well, when I first got out of school, my first job, I worked in community health. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I worked in the school system. I was working with the school counselors. And so I was working with the special ed teachers, and I was also working with autistic kids who had autism. And so um, I was kind of partnered with one particular child, and it was a lot of fun. I think that taught me a lot of patience, even though I was a mother myself. I think that helped, but I think a lot of times you just didn't know how the day was going to go, but they were like the best. They would, one particular little boy that I was working with, he just made me laugh all the time, and he was so loving. At
Mm-hmm.
the same time, he could be
Mm-hmm.
so difficult.
Yeah. It's
um,
different when it's someone else's kid. It's a little
yeah,
more challenging.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that was probably my first exposure. And then I worked in community health. I also worked in eating disorders, inpatient and outpatient residential facilities. So I kind of had exposure to a little bit of everything: families, couples, um, individuals. And I really enjoyed a little bit of, I'm glad I did it all, because I think I needed to do it all to figure out which one was kind of my fit, which
Mm-hmm.
population would I work well with. Um, but when I first came out of school, it was just, when you first come out of school, the book stuff, your textbooks, but it's like
Yeah.
when you are actually having to apply it to the work that you do, I,
Mm-hmm.
I was
You needed
definitely
that.
green, especially when I opened my own private practice. Um, I didn't know what I was doing. It was just like,
You're like,
I
I'm
was
just
a
figuring it
nervous
out.
wreck every single day that I would have to, show up and play it cool and pretend that I knew what was going on. And I knew, but at the same time, I think that pressure
Mm-hmm.
that I was experiencing forced me to get into the books, to do my research and to do whatever I could in order to show up a little bit more competent the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's definitely I wouldn't want to go back. It
Yeah.
was so scary, so much anxiety, but it also pushed me
Mm-hmm.
to become better, and I think find kind of like my niche.
Yeah, it like pushed you to develop yourself and continue to show up better for your clients. And I think that's, was there any like sort of mentor that you had at that time that helped you through that process, or were you kind of just figuring it out on your own?
Honestly, my mentor it was the books that I was reading. It was the
Hmm.
podcast that I was listening to. Um, it was anybody that I could find, or any kind of bit of information that I could turn to try and just see how it's done, gain additional, education, understand the different diagnoses out there, the different therapeutic approaches. Um, that was sort of it. With all of that was more of I think my mentor, but not an
Hmm.
actual like person.
Yeah. Do you think you would have benefited if you had had a mentor at that time? Do you think that that's something that would help new
Definitely.
therapists?
At the same time, I think this is one of those fields that it's not easy to just bring in,
Hmm.
someone right out of school and bring them into like an actual, session.
Hmm.
to see what that's like, because it's a very personal thing. It's a lot of
Yeah.
private things that are being talked about. And so obviously not everyone's going to feel comfortable having someone else kind of just sitting and listening.
Hmm.
Although I know that there are, opportunities for that. But I think I feel like you need to probably, if that is available, you probably need, at least for me, probably need to sit in on quite a few in
Hmm.
order to be like, okay, I see how this is supposed to be done, or how it should be done, because you start to kind of, it's more of you start to kind of get this feeling
It's like a
of the
flow.
flow. Exactly.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so we would do like these mock sessions in school, but still, like, I don't think anything could really prepare you to
For the
really
real
kind of get
experience.
an idea of, like, you truly feel confident and comfortable as a
Hmm.
therapist.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about the decision to start a group practice. Where did that come from?
So when I was working in one of the community health, mental health uh, clinics in Washington, um, again, I kind of ran into the thing where I needed more flexibility.
Hmm.
Um, and at the time, I had just given birth to um, my third child, from because I had gotten married again. And so she was about a year old, and it would just kind of, it would kill me, because I felt like I wasn't there as much for my first two kids. And then so when I had my third, I really wanted to make an effort to just be there a little bit more. And I think I was older, so I just had a lot more wisdom, and realized, how quickly it goes. And so I needed that flexibility. And so I heard that there was, actually, this group practice reached out to me, and that kind of opened my eyes, like, oh, I could actually, start my own private practice, with the support of another group. And basically, what it is kind of the same kind of like that model of where you are your own boss, but you're basically paying for services to kind of run your practice, because there's a lot of additional things that you aren't quite aware of that you might need when you start your private practice. So I did that, and I loved it, because it was already kind of my thing that I was already familiar with doing anyways. I think because being someone who's really good at managing time, because I'm a mom, because I had done that before. And you know I've kind of found my thing, that I was like, I'm good at this, I can do this. And at the time, COVID had hit, and so
Hmm.
everything became virtual. And also at the time, I don't think there were a whole lot of, I mean, not from what I can remember, I don't remember seeing a whole lot of Asian therapists. And
Hmm.
so people would just start reaching out to me, and they would even say in their message to me, I found you, and I'm looking for an Asian therapist.
Hmm.
And so people were just kind of coming to me, and I didn't have to necessarily, look. And I, obviously, during a time when people needed,
Yeah.
support, it was right during COVID.
Yeah.
um and then I kind of, like, again realized, I think I can do this, and maybe teach other people, what I've learned, and
Hmm.
offer them the things that maybe I wasn't offered at the time, or what I felt maybe I needed. um, and just do it a little bit different. And that's what led me to making the decision to open the group practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like you had experience with another group and then you can kind of see, things that you like, things that you appreciated that they did, and then also areas where, your company can be a little bit different. Yeah, that makes sense. So tell me a little bit about, Rest and Therapy Group today, and where you see it going in the future.
Yeah. So Rust and Therapy Group, we opened the group, was it end of 2023? It was more, maybe probably officially more like early 2024. But the first clinician who decided to join was, yeah, like in November 2023. And it just started with that one
Hmm.
who believed in me. And it was so scary, because I was like, I didn't have all of the supports that other group, even the group that I came from, had to offer. And it was just me. And I was very open and honest about that. but for whatever reason, like this clinician, she trusted me, and she said, yeah, let's do it. And she still works with me to this day. And because of that, I think I really wanted to make sure that I gave back as much as I could. So
Mhm.
over time, it's been, there've been a lot of changes, and periods of growth, and then times when I've had to just kind of pump the brakes a bit. Um, but it started with the one, and then it eventually, then there was a second one, then a third one. Um, and so I think it's been so much fun. It's been
Mhm.
fun to kind of see, you know, um, meet the different clinicians, and everyone has their own personality
Mhm.
and their own gifts and qualities, and I appreciate everyone's uniqueness.
Mhm.
And so it's so fun to kind of see a lot of them too, just maybe right out of school and seeing where they're at today.
Yeah.
And maybe hopefully I had some kind of role in that,
Mhm.
where I could have, where I was able to show them, like, hey, this is what it looks like, when you're doing a consult. This is what an email could look like. This is what the intake might look like. These are some things that you can consider if you're working remotely and having a virtual telehealth session.
Mhm.
All of those little things that I kind of had to figure out over time that made it work for me, and so hopefully that's made some kind of difference in their practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we're about to bring on our 20th therapist, so it seems to be working. Okay. Yeah, so just in general, what just to kind of end it on a positive note and thinking about the future, like what gives you hope right now? Either about in general, about the company or whatever you want to share.
I think what gives me hope is that a lot of the people, actually, all of the originals that first joined, they're still with me to this day.
Hmm. Yeah.
And which tells me, I guess maybe we're doing something right.
Hmm.
And I think the feedback that we receive, is one of the reasons why they either people who come to us is because the reputation that
Hmm.
we've created,
Yeah.
and that's really important to me. And I've always tried to make it centered around the therapist, because I
Mm.
know how hard it is, because I've been
Yeah.
there, I'm still there at times.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I really try to make it centered around them and listen to what they need. And and I'm a big dreamer. And so, I also take it, upon myself too, to kind of dream, not just for myself, but for the practice, because it's easy to get really busy. And, and I think in the busyness, sometimes you start to, lose sight
Hmm.
of, your goals, of the dreams that could be. And I think like this is also a place where people can feel like they're part of something, not just a practice, but maybe just feel included,
Hmm.
feel like this is home. This is someplace that, I think it's not just a group practice, but it's also a place where hopefully, friendships and relationships can be built, ideas can be created. And I'm excited to see what the future holds. I would like to create a place where providers can come here, and it's not just a place where they can run their practice, but also a place where eventually, if they decide they want to start their own group practice or another business, or just in general, just almost like a place where it's a coaching, it's a mentorship
Hmm.
within a group practice. And it doesn't
Yeah.
only have to be about, their therapeutic practice. It can be just for anything in general.
Yeah, absolutely. A place of growth and a place to come and learn, a place to share with each other and develop each other's skills. I think that that's really powerful. And yeah, I think utilizing each other for all of our uniqueness and the things that we bring to the table is, just such a magical place to be. So, thank you so much for sharing your story and for sharing, all of the amazing things that you've learned throughout your life, not only with me, but with the other therapists on the team, because I know, how much of a difference that's made for them too. So I really just appreciate your time. And yeah, thank you so much.